are they using the Constitution as an excuse? Like, what are the things they don't want to do that they're kind of saying, well, we can't?
Well, for many years it was they didn't want to spend more money on defense. They didn't want to build an amphibious capability. They didn't want to let the Japan Self-Defense Force, go overseas to train and operate with people. They limited what they could do with the Americans. And where they could do it as well. So the U.S. forces ultimately have to go out of Japan to train to defend Japan, if you can figure that out, because they don't have access to the proper training areas. And that is sort of the reality, but the reasons, the fundamental reason, there is the historic experience, because in 1945, every Japanese city of any consequence was in ashes. And this was before the nuclear bombs got dropped. It was just, Eve wasn't even icing on the cake. It was sort of just rearranging some rubble ultimately. And after the war, you could actually starve to death in Japan. That's how bad things were. Whereas we had victory parades and, all the veterans went off to college on the GI Bill. In Japan, it was just misery. So no one wanted to do that. But also, you had the Americans around to defend them. And it was the Japanese who asked the Americans to sign that treaty, the defense treaty. It wasn't the Americans that forced it on anyone. The Japanese kind of begged to have the Americans do it. But then you find that if you have somebody else underwriting your defense, you don't have to spend as much money on defense. You can spend that money on other things, like a national health system, supporting your industries. And generally, defense is not a vote getter in most countries. And as I said, also builds up this comfort and this just sort of you're happy with the system as it is, and a dependency. No one likes to call it that, but that's what it is. And it was ultimately an unhealthy dependency. And the Americans were glad to go along with it for any length of time. And then when maybe the last 15 years or so, when it became obvious something needed done, that the Americans never really pushed the Japanese to do what they needed to do. Of course, they will say, they will tell you, "Oh, Newsham, you don't know what you're talking about," which is usually true. But they'll say it, and they'll say, "Well, we tried. We always asked them. We told them that we wanted them to do this," and they would hear it, going, "Yeah, okay. And what are you gonna make us do it?" And no, yes, you can tell them. So the Japanese were never as frightened of us as they were of their own Ministry of Finance, or of their own Asahi Shimbun, which is their equivalent of the New York Times, but really anti-military. And so we never pushed it. And we had been given, in around 1970, the best advice American has ever been given about dealing with Japan was given ultimately by the then Prime Minister, a fellow named Tanaka Kakue, of the Lockheed scandal fame. But the Americans wanted to put an aircraft carrier into Yokosuka, the naval base near Tokyo. They wanted to permanently assign it. And the Americans were hemming and hawing, and State Department and the embassy were saying, well, the timing just wasn't right. It would be too hard for the Japanese to do it. And nothing was happening. And then the short version of it is, word came from the Japanese side, and it was from Tanaka, but his advisors had helped him figure this out. And the advice to the Americans was, tell us what you want, tell us what you need, and don't back down. And the Americans never do. We've ignored that advice, except for that one case of the getting USS Midway into Yokosuka. And I don't know what it is, but we don't want to be overbearing. We're afraid the Japanese will get angry, whatever it is. And instead we just sort of do nothing. And here we have a Japanese military that is nowhere near able to fight the way it should, nor able to fight with us.
And this is interesting, because this is a story I've been hearing a lot over the years, like how NATO countries completely depended on the U.S. for security, and they got to put their spending elsewhere. We recently had a guest on who said essentially Taiwan is in the same situation as well, where they're not developing their military like they should because they're relying on the U.S. Japan's doing the same. This sounds like it's not going to work.
It's really late in the day. The Japanese are doing more than they ever have defense-wise, They've announced they're going to double defense spending. That was before the yen collapsed, of course. And they've said they're going to improve their military, buy long-range missiles, do more training with the Americans, et cetera, et cetera. But they don't quite know what to do, what to spend it on. How do you build up a military so it can fight? This is a very specific sort of skill set and knowledge that you need, and it's not like you just sit down and figure it out. And so what's the solution? Well, have the Americans tell them.
Well, I believe I have a solution, as I've said. Gundams.
Well, if you can find them. I think they're
nukes are better, easier.
Well, speaking of nukes, so Japan is mostly powered by nuclear power, right? Because it's small set of islands. They don't have a lot of natural resources for power generation. They have over a dozen active nuclear power plants, right? Which means they also have refined uranium, and that same U-235 uranium can also theoretically be used for bombs. So why can't Japan just make its own nukes? It shouldn't be that hard, right?
It shouldn't be. I actually asked a friend who knows these things and who's not a history major. And he said, for a basic bomb, that would be no sweat. For like a hydrogen bomb, a little sweat. And he said something beyond that. They'd have to work a little bit, but it wouldn't be hard. They could probably have one in short order. And I've heard any estimates from 6 weeks to 6 months. In terms of delivery systems, Japan's sort of rocket capabilities developed through their space program are excellent. They could figure it out if they wanted. But just having a nuclear weapon doesn't guarantee protection. Certainly if you're a democracy or a consensual government, it would also cause some immense problems in the relationship with the Americans if Japan did get that. So I say it's not quite the silver bullet that people imagine that it is. And really for a democracy, you really need a strong conventional capability along with, if you're going to have nuclear weapons. And it can either be your own or somebody who's got them and you're pretty sure they will use them. But without that conventional capability, you could find yourself in extremis so quickly. You're just getting defeated, on every front, that you feel I've got no choice but to use nuclear weapons. So actually, without the conventional part, you find that you may have some trouble. You're going to use nuclear weapons, and even then it's, if the other side's got 100 for every one you have, they might say, well, go ahead and see what happens.
So the nukes that are fast to build are like the old school ones, like the ones that we had dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? Where they just explode a critical mass of U-235 together, and like really simple, right? That's a 6-week one, you said.
Oh, that's basically, as I understand it. But I think the Japanese are pretty clever. And I think they could probably put a good one, like a better one together quick enough. And I do.
So that's the Toyota model, but there's like the Lexus, if you want like the Lexus of nuclear weapons, that's
they could do it. They're clever enough and pretty quickly. And you do sometimes the debate amongst the commentariat as well. Do they have something going on under the table anyway? I don't know. I don't know.
You really don't know?
I don't actually. It's if I did, I would tell you. Well,
no, you wouldn't.
Well, I would actually. I just can't keep a secret. But
that's a good quality in a Marine intelligence officer.
I got to tell somebody. You guys are as good as anyone.
Don't worry, nobody watches.
No, the thing is, I don't know. I'm not aware of it. I've never heard anything to suggest that they do. Well, but I'll bet they've thought about it.